you feel that it wasn't you, it was somebody else's error or potential error. So you very humbly express how you go about repairing your errors. But what about situations where a loved one, a coworker, you feel screwed up or wronged you, right? As many people do, we all do from time to time feel this way. Do you approach them and try and repair the situation? Because there's a little bit less or far less control when, than the situation you described. And by the way, the situation you described, I think, is a perfect one because I think we all screw up. And so the answer to this second question is sort of the answer to the first, which is if everyone did what you were doing, the world would be truly a far better place. But not everyone's doing what you're doing. So if you feel wronged, assuming that wrong wasn't sociopathically motivated, what is your process for going about repairing a relationship fracture like that?
Again, this assumes that this is a relationship that matters, right? So in every interaction, you're only really able to optimize around one thing, and you have to decide, is this one thing that I'm optimizing around the relationship, or is it the outcome? I mean, there are other things to optimize around, but you understand that those are different.
Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. I think I get it, but flesh that out a bit.
If I'm at the market and I'm trying to buy a new car, and I'm sitting there talking to the car salesman, that's a relationship. That's an interaction. Now, I want to buy this car for as little as possible, and he wants to sell the car for as much as possible. Well, in that interaction, my relationship with him means nothing. Let's assume I don't know this guy and he's not like my best friend. I'm optimizing everything around the outcome. So everything I do in negotiating and in interacting with him personally is based on getting the best outcome for me. It's very selfish, right? Nothing wrong with that, by the way.
He's doing the same
thing.
right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
But now, for example, pretend that you are the car salesman. You're one of my closest friends. And it's your dealership. Like, it's your money. Like, it's, you can't sell this thing to me at a loss. I don't want you to do that because I want you to be able to make money. And similarly, like, you care about me and you don't want me to overpay for this. So now we're negotiating and we're both trying to optimize for an outcome, but our relationship also matters. It's a very different negotiation at that point. And so I think I always try to ask myself this question when I'm having some interpersonal conflict, which is, what am I optimizing for? So, if I'm having a quarrel with my wife, I have to remind myself that the objective or outcome is not necessarily the top priority. Being right all the time, which is my default state, it's just to be a bull in a china shop. It's to be authoritarian instead of authoritative. And that doesn't work if the relationship matters. So to answer your question, the first thing I'm going to ask myself if I feel slighted is, what is the nature of the relationship? Is it even worth trying to do something about this? And presumably you're asking the question because the lens is yes. This is someone who you care about more than in just a transactional way. Usually what I've realized is I can't try to approach the situation without fully understanding myself, and that takes a while. So generally, and this is where, I still 1 to 2 times a week, I'm still working with a therapist. I have to kind of try to figure it out on my own and then usually bounce it off a therapist and say, well, I think this is why I'm upset about this. I think that when this person did this or said this, I felt this. First of all, am I correct in what I felt? Because remember, sometimes you might, at least for me, this was the case. I would just feel anger in response to every interaction. But what I didn't realize was that anger was really just another emotion that was superimposed on top of hurt, or superimposed on top of fear, or superimposed on top of shame, or superimposed on top of something else. But I didn't know how to articulate any of those other emotions, so the only thing I could really articulate was anger. So if anger is the only thing I know, and anger is the only response I see, it's not very helpful. It's not very insightful. So that's that's a big part of it, is being able to deconstruct what I'm feeling. Oh, what I really feel is loss, or what I really feel is abandonment right now. And that sometimes takes a while to figure out, at least for me. Like I'm still, I'm only a few years into this journey, and maybe other people figured these things out when they were in their 20s. And so they're veterans. They can do this more naturally. But that's step one. If I don't really understand what's going on, I can't even begin to try to approach this person to say, this is how I feel. This is, how do you feel? And what are we optimizing for in this interaction?
Well, I certainly know you are not alone in this sense that it's a process and it takes a lot of time, and on a case-by-case basis can take a lot of time to figure out, exactly what one is feeling. I think it really goes back to the coarseness of language as a way to sort one's feelings. It was actually your other, because we mentioned Paul Conti, who was one of your Stanford Medical School classmates, but another previous guest on this podcast who was also one of your medical school classmates, Dr. Carl Diceroth, right?
Yep.
Psychiatrist and bioengineer of phenomenal stature and doing amazing things in the world, who said, most of the time we have no idea how other people feel, even though we think we do. And most of the time we don't even know how we feel. I mean, our ability to really know what we're really feeling is terrible. And yet we recognize the broad bins. I'm pissed off. I'm super happy. I'm relaxed. I'm tired. I mean, just think about how coarse that language is for for all the nuance and all the underlying things, conscious and subconscious, that could be driving an emotional state. It's really quite unbelievable.
Yeah, beyond the valence, that was, positive versus negative, that was about the extent of my emotional language until, somewhat recently.
Well, it strikes me you've come a very long way. Maybe you could share with us a little bit about what you learned on these, what you called retreats, or, in the book chapter, you described deliberately going off to a treatment center, multiple treatment centers over time, to really drill into this process of understanding oneself better and how one's current state of emotional processing and emotional stability are influencing relationships and the key importance of that. Was there any kind of overriding theme for you? For instance, could you trace back to specific events or themes of childhood that made a lot of it make sense? Or is it far more nuanced than that?
Well, the first thing I would say is I wish I could tell you that this was a very deliberate and wonderful